The morning air carried the settlement's warmth, warmth that had no source, light that had no angle. Quintus had stopped trying to identify the mechanism behind either. Whatever technology sustained this place was performing for no one's benefit, and examining it would not improve his capacity to make the decision that was, at this hour, approaching him on two legs. Sail found him on the path between the Arvith's landing position and the central plaza. She did not appear to have been waiting. She appeared to have been walking in the same direction at the same time, a coincidence that required planning. Aish walked 3 steps behind Sail, hands loose at her sides, her expression the careful blankness she wore when she was translating between people who were each trying to say more than words could carry. "She would like to walk with you," Ayesha said. "I can see that," Quintus said. "Tell her she is welcome." They walked. The path curved through a stand of trees that resembled trees only loosely. The bark had the grain of wood, but the color shifted with the light, pale amber to deep bronze, and the leaves moved in rhythms that did not match the wind. The settlement's ikran were audible somewhere to the left, their 2-note morning calls layering into the acoustic shape of the canopy overhead. Pleasant, designed to be pleasant, which meant someone had designed it, and that was the thought Quintus kept returning to with this place. Every comfort here was a product of intention so old it had calcified into environment. Sal spoke. Her voice had the quality Quintus had come to associate with the keeper woman, unhurried, precise, as though each word had been selected from a larger set, and the ones she did not use were still visible behind the ones she chose. She spoke in whatever archaic Romani variant she and Aisha shared, and Aisha rendered it in the pidgin that had become the crew's working tongue. "What this outpost does," Aisha translated, matching Sail's rhythm, "we receive, we provide resources, we do not direct. Whatever you decide next is yours to decide." Quintus nodded. He saw Nave, walking. The path opened into a clearing where water ran across shaped stone, a fountain, or something that served the purpose of a fountain. The water was clear and moved with a regularity that suggested mechanical assistance hidden beneath the stone. Sail continued. Asha followed. "I am telling you this because I want you to know that what the Covenant operative offers and what I offer are structurally different, and the difference is, I am not asking you to do anything." He stopped walking. The stop was precise. She had reached the point in the conversation she intended to reach, and she had reached the point on the path she intended to reach simultaneously. Quintus suspected she had calibrated the route to the length of the speech. He turned to face her. She met his eyes with the steady, clear regard he had seen from provincial governors who believed themselves to be neutral parties between competing factions. The governors were never neutral. Their neutrality was a position they occupied because it served their interests, and the fact that they believed otherwise was what made them dangerous. Sail was far older and far more capable than any provincial governor, but the structure was the same. "Thank you," he said. He said it to Aish, who would translate it to Sael, but he looked at Sael when he said it because the woman deserved the respect of his attention regardless of the language barrier. Sael inclined her head, a precise motion, acknowledging the acknowledgement. Then she walked past him, toward the plaza, and was gone among the bronze-bark trees with the unhurried pace of someone who had done what she came to do and was now finished. I woken in duathanic kanatpada and was now finished. Aisha remained. She means it, Aisha said, in the modern pidgin. She is not competing with whoever this other one is. She genuinely believes in what you told us. "I know," Quintus said, "but she also wanted to make sure you knew before you went in." "I know that too." Aish studied him with the look she wore when she was deciding how much of someone's interior state to name aloud. She decided against it. She nodded once, gave his forearm a brief squeeze, the Romani woman's version of a tactical briefing, and followed Sail's path toward the plaza. Quintus stood by the fountain and listened to the water and thought about what had just happened. "That was the most political conversation I have had since leaving Rome. She told me nothing I did not already know, and made me understand something I had not yet considered. That is a rare skill. I spent 30 years watching men in the Senate do it badly. The difference Sale had named between offering resources without direction and offering resources with a purpose was real. It was the difference between a supply depot and a recruiting station. Both provided food. One of them also provided a destination. He had an hour before the meeting with the Covenant operative. They spent it walking the settlement's perimeter, cataloging what he could see. The Ekran settlement dwellers moved through their routines, 40-odd beings with triple-jointed legs and scales that caught the ambient light and scattered it in fractured colors. They tended plots of vegetation he could not identify. They communicated in their layered way, voice, posture, and that third channel he could feel as pressure against his skin without being able to decode it. They were, as far as he could determine, content. 30 generations, Sale had said. This settlement had been here for 30 generations. The Ekran who lived here had been born here, raised here, had never known a combine cell or a freight manifest or the light that came through a containment field barrier. They were free in a way his people aboard the Arvath were not yet free, because his people still flinched at sounds that approximated the pitch of a combine alarm. 30 generations of receiving the freed and resourcing them, and then doing nothing else. Veth's message had arrived the morning after Hattori's identification, a communication through the settlement's internal system, not through Aishe or Sale. It had been addressed to Quintus by name in a script he recognized as the cursive abbreviation style used in Roman military dispatches, not the formal Latin of senatorial correspondence, the field shorthand of a centurion's daily report that had been the first thing that told him something about the Covenant operative. The second was that the message contained no terms, no argument, no preliminary positioning. It contained a time, a location, and a single sentence. A conversation at your convenience on a subject of mutual strategic interest. Military, direct, respectful of his time, the signature of someone who understood command culture from the inside, as a participant, not an observer. The hour passed. Quintus went to the meeting. The room was a working space on the settlement's eastern edge, small, low-ceilinged, with a wide window that looked out over the cultivated terraces. The light came in at an angle that illuminated the center of the room and left the edges in shadow, a practical space for a practical conversation. The Covenant operative was already there. He stood by the window with his hands visible, a choice Quintus recognized. He was showing he was unarmed, because it communicated respect for the meeting's terms. He was wrong. That was the word Quintus's mind kept arriving at. Wrong in a way that was different from Saul's wrongness. Saul was wrong like a building that was too old to have been built by the people who lived in it. She was an anachronism, a thing that did not fit its context, but there was a stillness to her wrongness. She had been in one place for a long time, and the place had shaped itself around her. This man was wrong like a road that had been traveled too many times. The surface was smooth, but underneath it you could sense the compaction of 1,000 passages. His face was human, completely human, features that could have been Roman, or Greek, or Anatolian, or any of the mixed peoples of the Eastern Mediterranean. His skin was darker than Quintus's, the brown of someone who spent decades under stronger suns. His hair was cut short, his build was lean, the build of a man who moved frequently and carried what he needed and nothing else. His eyes were the problem. They were brown and clear and entirely too full of things. Quintus had seen haunted men, men who carried their dead like stones in their packs. This was different. This was a man who remembered everything he had seen, and he had seen a great deal, and the act of remembering had not diminished any of it. He spoke in Latin, not archaic Latin, not liturgical Latin, not the formal Latin of text that survived through centuries of copying. The Latin than Quintius's era, the military dialects, clipped vowels and swallowed endings that marked a man who had learned his grammar in a barracks rather than a schoolroom. The pronunciation was correct to within a generation of Quintius's own birth. Centurion, the operative said. The word carried the weight of a professional greeting between equals, an acknowledgement of rank and its implications. I don't know your rank, Quintus said. He kept his voice level. He was aware in the precise way of a man who had spent 30 years reading the men around him that this person was more dangerous than anything else on this settlement. I don't carry one. My name is Veth, Watari's name for the shadow in the plaza. Quintus filed that the man had chosen to confirm the label the crew had given him rather than insist on a different one, a concession deliberate. I know what your people call me and I accept it. Then sit, Quintus said, and gestured at the low bench by the window. There were two benches, angled toward each other, with a flat surface between them that might have been a table. Quintus took the bench that put his back to the wall and his face to the door. They took the other without comment. For a moment neither spoke. The light from the window laid a bright trapezoid across the floor between them. Outside, the terraces caught the settlement's ambient glow, and the Ikrin moved through their morning patterns. Quintus could hear the layered two-note calls, muffled by the walls. You addressed the message to me, Quintus said, not to Aisha, who is our speaker, not to Hattori, who identified you. To me, you are the one who will make the decision, Veth said. It was not a question. Quintus let it sit. What decision? Veth leaned forward slightly, engaged, not aggressive. The movement had the precision of someone who was aware of his own body language and chose each gesture for its effect, in the practiced way of someone who had spent so long communicating across cultures that deliberate physical clarity had become reflex. The continuance has been maintaining this waypoint for a long time, Veth said. In that time, the Combine's harvesting operations have not materially changed. Groups arrive, are resourced, move on. The Combine adjusts its routes slightly and continues. This outpost is not reducing the problem, it is managing the overflow. Quintus said nothing. He let the words land and measured them. The argument was clean, the logic was military. Assess the position, identify whether the current strategy was achieving its stated objective. State plainly that it was not. You disagree with what Sale does here, Quintus said. I disagree with what it accomplishes. What she does here, receiving the freed, providing for them, is good. I have no quarrel with the act. My quarrel is with the strategic logic that says this is sufficient. Quintus studied the man's face. Veth met his examination without flinching, without performing comfort. He simply sat and let himself be read. Tell me what you're offering, Quintus said. Veth nodded. Once, a clean motion. 3 things. First, intelligence on the Combine's frontier operations. Weaknesses, schedules, the administrators who manage the harvesting routes in this region. I have been tracking their operations for longer than this outpost has existed. I know where they are thin and where they are strong, and where the institutional gaps between Freight Command and the court create exploitable seams. Quintus felt his pulse pick up. Recognition. This was the language of a campaign briefing. He had sat in rooms like this before, with better maps and worse intelligence, and listened to men who knew the terrain describe the enemy's disposition. The cadence was the same. The stakes were different only in scale. Second, Veth continued, I know the locations of other freed cargo groups, ones large enough and organized enough to be contacted. Some are in the frontier, some are still in Combine operational space hiding. Some don't know they could be found. Tanosil Jini Combine operational space hiding. Some don't know they could be found. How many? 7 that I am confident of. 3 more that are probable. They range from 12 souls to nearly 1,000. Kissing absorbed that. 7 groups, 3 probable. The Arveth carried approximately 660 people. If even half of those groups could be reached, he stopped the calculation. He was pricing a campaign he had not agreed to. And the third thing, he said. Veth paused. The pause was not theatrical. It was the pause of a man choosing how to frame something he had thought about for a long time. You have a ship, Veth said. You have 600 people who know what the inside of a Combine harvest vessel looks like. You have a credible operation that the Combine has no file on. That combination has not existed in the frontier in my memory. I am asking you to use it. The room was quiet. Outside an Ikrin called, a single, rising note that found no answering second voice. You are asking us to go back toward the Combine, Quintus said. I am asking you to consider that going back toward the Combine is the only strategic action that changes the situation. Everything else, staying here, moving deeper into the frontier, building a settlement, is holding. Holding is defensible. I am not dismissing it, but holding assumes the Combine will decline on its own, and in 10,000 years of observation, it has not declined. It has not grown either. It has continued. The bureaucracy perpetuates itself because nothing has ever given it a reason to stop, and we would be that reason. You would be the beginning of one. Quintus turned the ring on his finger. The iron service ring, worn smooth by 30 years of wearing, the metal dark with the oils of his skin. He turned it once, twice, a habit from the old life. The ring turned when he was thinking, and the men who had served under him had learned to read the speed of the turning as a gauge of how fast his mind was moving. I will consider this, Quintus said. Vaith's expression did not change. He had expected this answer. The fact that he had expected it and had still made the argument with full conviction, rather than holding back for a second round, told Quintus something about the man. I've been here 6 months, Vaith said. I will be here when you are ready. In Ulysses, the motion was clean and unhurried, a man who was finished and saw no reason to pretend otherwise. He walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. Your Latin, he said. 3rd century of your city's founding, Eastern garrison. Your commander was, he named the name Quintus had not heard spoken aloud in what felt like a lifetime, the correct name, the correct pronunciation. Then Vaith was gone, and Quintus was alone in the room with the light and the silence and the knowledge that a man who had been observing the Combine for longer than this outpost had existed had just asked him to take his ship and his people back into the machine that had harvested them. He sat for a long time. The light moved across the floor. The trapezoid narrowed, lengthened, shifted toward the eastern wall. The sounds of the settlement filtered in, Ikren calls, the movement of water across shaped stone, voices in languages he did not speak. I have seen generals press advantage, and I have seen generals hold. Both have their place. What I am calculating now is the cost of pressing. We go back toward the Combine. Some of us don't come back. We free people who would not otherwise be freed. We become, in the Combine's records, something they have a file on. Those are the costs. I am not dismissing the offer. I am pricing it. The cost of holding was what Vaith had said. A generation of freed cargo passes through this outpost and moves on into the frontier. The Combine adjusts its routes by a fraction of a degree and continues harvesting. Nothing changes. The machine runs. The cost of pressing was blood, his people's blood, the blood of 600 souls who had already bled in Combine cells and had earned, by any measure he knew, the right to stop bleeding. But the 7 groups, the 3 probable, the 1,000 souls who did not know they could be found. He turned the ring. The position supports it. The intelligence is credible. The man is credible, not trustworthy, not yet, but credible. He is not lying about the Combine's disposition or the strategic opportunity. His lying would not serve his purpose. He needs us to act on accurate information or the action fails, and a failed action serves no one. He is a general who wants to press advantage. I know this species of man. I served under 3 of them. 2 won their campaigns. 1 did not. The difference was not in the quality of the argument. All 3 had correct strategic logic. The difference was in the cost they were willing to impose on the men who followed them. Vaith is willing to impose the cost, and he was honest about that. He did not hide it. The question is whether I am willing to accept it. He did not have the answer yet. The ring turned and did not stop. Atari was where Quintus expected him to be, on the Arvith's observation deck, which offered a view of the settlement below and the star field above. The strategist sat with his back to the bulkhead and his legs crossed, his hands resting on his knees in the posture Quintus had come to recognize as his thinking position. Ahit sat nearby, cross-legged on the deck plating, rewrapping a length of cloth around her forearm, a habit she returned to when her hands needed occupation. He looked up when Quintus entered and read his face in a glance. "You met him," she said. "I met him. Evandarim." Quintus sat. The deck was cold, the Arvaith environmental systems ran efficient but not generous, and the observation deck was the least insulated space on the ship. He felt the chill through the fabric of his clothes and welcomed it. Cold sharpened thought. He told them what Veth had offered. He laid it out in order, the intelligence, the contacts, the argument, without inflection, without his assessment. He wanted Hattori's rid before he colored it with his own. She translated for Hattori, her voice low and steady, matching Quintus's pace. When she finished, the observation deck was quiet. The starfield turned slowly beyond the viewport. Not actually turning, Deka had explained, but the settlement's rotation creating the illusion of movement. The stars were still. Everything else moved around them. Hituri was silent for a long time. His eyes were closed. His breathing was even. Quintus had learned that this was not meditation, it was processing. The strategist was mapping the argument, looking for the structure underneath the words, testing it against what he knew. Then he opened his eyes and spoke. Aisha caught it, held it in the space between languages, and delivered it. He is not wrong. Longwo, 3 words. Quintus felt the weight of them settle. No, Quintus said, he isn't. Hattori spoke again, more this time, a string of precise syllables that Aisha rendered with care. But a man can be correct in his logic and still be offering you a knife that cuts in both directions. The question is not whether the argument holds. The question is what happens to the people who carry it out. That is what I am pricing, Quintus said. Cody looked at him. The strategist's gaze was the most direct thing about him. Everything else was oblique, measured, approached from angles, but when he looked directly at you, the full weight of a man who had survived Sengoku politics sat behind those eyes. He spoke one more sentence. Aisha translated, "This is not a decision for 2 people on a cold deck." Wintat nodded slowly. He had known this before Hattori said it. He had known it in the room with Veth, and before that on the path with Sale, and before that in the message that had arrived addressed to him specifically, Wintes Centurion, the man who decided. For 30 years of military life, that had been the structure, he decided. Others followed. The weight sat on his shoulders because that was where it belonged, but he was not a centurion anymore. He was one of 7 people on the ship that 6 of those people had named, carrying 600 souls that all of them were responsible for, and the decision Veth was asking them to make would determine whether those 600 souls went deeper into safety or turned back toward the machine. And that was not his decision alone. He called them together at dusk. The settlement had fire. It was the first open flame Quintus had seen since Earth, real fire, burning in a stone-lined pit at the center of the plaza, casting orange light that moved and flickered in ways that the settlement's ambient glow never did. The Ikran kept their distance from it. The fire was for the humans. Sale had arranged it, or someone had arranged it, and the gesture, "These creatures need this particular thing," was another piece of evidence that the keepers had been watching for a very long time. 7 humans in firelight. Quintus, Sindel, who sat with his forearms on his knees and the firelight catching the scar tissue on his hands. Hattori, straight-backed, his shadow falling long and still behind him. Hakla, who had chosen the position with the widest sight line and sat there with the alertness of someone who never fully stopped scanning terrain. Tigo, cross-legged, his face in the middle distance, the new interior quiet that had settled over him since the plaza conversation with Sale. Aisha sitting between Hattori and Deka because she always sat where the most translation work was needed. Deka, who had a piece of the Arvith's hull plating in her lap that she was turning over in her hands, her mind visibly running parallel processes behind her eyes. And the Ichana representative, the eldest of the three from the Arvith, who had earned a seat at this council by virtue of having been in the cells alongside them. The eldest sat slightly apart, iridescent scales catching the firelight in patterns that rippled with each of the two-note calls still sounding from the settlement behind them. The segmented eyes reflected the flames as a dozen small, shifting fires. Quintus stood. The others looked at him. He felt the weight of the attention the way he had always felt it, as obligation. These people were listening because they trusted him to say something worth hearing. Today I met with the Covenant operative, he said. Sudivan began to translate, her voice running under his like a second current in the same river. He offered us intelligence on Combine operations. He offered us the locations of other groups, freed cargo, like us who might be contacted. And he asked us to take the Arvith back toward Combine space. He laid out Veth's argument. He did it cleanly, without editorializing, the way he would have presented an enemy disposition to his officers in the old life. Here are the forces, here is the terrain, here is the opportunity, here is the risk. Then he laid out Sal's position, which was not a position so much as an absence of one. The continuance receives, it provides, it does not direct. That too was a strategy of patience, of long timelines, of absorbing the Combine's overflow without confronting the Combine itself. Neither is wrong, Quintus said. Both have costs. And Etheribi sat down. The fire cracked. A log shifted. Orange sparks rose into the air above the plaza and were lost against the alien sky. Silence. 6 languages and many silences. Quintus watched them, Sevihel's jaw working, the big man chewing on the problem, the way he chewed on everything, with his whole body engaged. Akla's eyes tracking the fire's movement the way she tracked everything, looking for the pattern. Tigo motionless, listening to something no one else could hear. Deka turned the hull plating over in her hands one more time. Then she looked up. How good is his intelligence? The question was practical. It was the right first question. Quintus answered it. The firelight moved. The conversation began halting, translated, looping through Aisha and back, with gaps where languages did not map and silences where they did. Sevhel spoke once, bluntly. Hattori spoke twice, precisely. The Kankle asked about the route. Igo asked about the people who were waiting. The Ikrin eldest made a sound, a low, resonant tone that the fire's crackle could not mask. The sound carried something in the third channel, something Quintus felt against his skin like a change in air pressure. Aishi listened, her head tilted, and then translated not the words but the shape of them. We remember the cells. We remember who opened them. The fire burned. The deliberation continued. Quintus sat in it, turning his ring, watching the faces of the people he was responsible for as they weighed what it would cost to go back toward the thing that had taken them. In 30 years of military life, I made my own decisions. I am waiting on this one. I do not know yet if that is wisdom or cowardice. The fire threw long shadows across the plaza stones. The sparks rose. The conversation wound through its many languages and its many silences, and the decision approached, not arrived, not yet, but approaching, like a tide that had already turned somewhere out of sight and was now, inevitably, making its way toward shore.